we may think that, spicing it up and doing different things is how we create desire. And I'm not against that. I think that's wonderful and playful and something that I want to encourage. But I think it's this opening our hearts to each other and staying vulnerable that is the real secret to lifelong.
You're listening to Get Your Marriage On, the fun and spicy podcast bringing you new tools and fresh ideas so that you can be the sexiest couple you know.
Everyone, welcome to this special episode of Get Your Marriage On. I'm delighted to have as my guest Dr. Laurie Watson. She's an author, speaker, licensed marriage, family, and therapist, and also the host of an amazing podcast called Foreplay Radio. You should totally check it out. Laurie, thanks for coming today.
Well, thanks for having me. This is very fun.
This is really fun. For those that don't know you, can you introduce yourself a little more? How you got into what you're doing, and I don't know, what gets you excited?
Sure. So no pun intended, but talking about sex, gets me excited. Yeah, I am a sexologist. I have a PhD, and I have been a certified sex therapist with ASECT for, 20 years or so, 10, 15, 20 years. And I have a big clinic in Raleigh, North Carolina. We do online treatment. We do see people all over the world. And I'm an author. I've written Wanting Sex Again, How to Rediscover Desire and Heal a Sexless Marriage. I blog for Psychology Today. It's called Married and Still Doing It. And I think I have about 13 million downloads. And then now I am the host with my amazing podcast co-host, George Fowler. We're both therapists, and our podcast is usually about number 6, somewhere in the top 6 for iTunes under sexuality. And we have, I think, close to about 6 million downloads at this point. So we're doing pretty well and
That's
enjoying
awesome.
that. Yeah, we really enjoy the collaboration. We're learning so much, I think, as therapists and as people, as a man and a woman talking about this really, difficult, delicate subject, but helping each other do that more openly. And we hear the feedback from people that, they've never had these conversations. They've never talked to each other. And that's probably the biggest feedback we get from them, letters from our listeners who say, you changed our marriage because we had never talked about sex before. And it's so important to us. And somehow or another, just listening to you two, we're able to talk about it in a simpler, easier, less inhibited way. So it's been a great journey.
That's cool. And that's my experience too. And I think it's experience for a lot of couples. Like, talking about sex in your marriage is really hard, or it seems scary at first.
It is, because it is so difficult. Well, I think there's a lot of cultural taboo about talking about sex. We are raised that it's this private area of life. Maybe our parents didn't talk to us, or when they did talk to us, they were anxious. And so we kind of pick that up as this is an anxious subject. In a very sex-saturated culture, it's amazing how few couples actually have language to talk to each other about it. We see it everywhere. We see it in movies. We hear about it in songs. But people are not talking about their own sexual experience and desires and wishes and fantasies to each other. I think it's just really a fearful place to go.
Is it fearful because it's really vulnerable? You're really opening yourself up?
I think we are. We, open up if we tell our partner about what we want, what we think about, what we wish for. What if our partner says, well, you're just a freak, or you're a pervert, or you're too vanilla. That's boring. That's all you think about. That's all you want. I mean, there are so many ways that conversation can go badly.
Uh-huh. And isn't like our sexual side kind of a weird part of being human? I got to admit, it's like a weird side of us.
We are creatures of body and spirit, I believe. So yes, there's this part that is romantic, and maybe some of us think about it kind of, it's fade to black as soon as we enter the bedroom, we fade to dark. But really, we're also creatures of the body. And once you're comfortable with it, I think it's such a lovely expression of love. Many, many people feel love through the body much more intensely, and they're more eloquent and articulate in the way that they touch than they are with words.
I think that's incredible because our brains love body learning.
Mm-hmm.
And so when two people together, like you learn so much faster about, and you can map each other so much better through that touch. It's incredible.
Right. Nuzzling, cuddling, gazing, skin to skin touch, nipple in mouth. This is attachment at its best. It's also attachment at its earliest. We become attached most securely to our mothers in similar sorts of experiences. I'm not saying that it's sexual, but it's very sensual in terms of our first secure attachment with mom. And that's the same thing that's replicated in our bodies in sexual contact, right? We have that same experience of body to body, skin to skin, pleasure and sensuality that bonds us. We actually reduce cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and we increase oxytocin when we're sexual with our partner. And those are decreased stress, increased bonding hormones. So it's physiological and it's very emotional as well.
And spiritual too.
And spiritual as well.
Definitely.
Right? We have a sense of connection with something bigger than ourselves when we have orgasms, right? There's this kind of disintegrating experience where we're very out of body, and then we come back in with our partners holding and awareness of skin on skin.
And if that's what we want, that's what we desire, why is it so hard to open up and talk about what we want with our partner, or have those sexual conversations?
Yeah, we haven't learned how to do that. And I think that's what we're trying to do at Foreplay Radio, is help people talk about it. And once you get comfortable with the language, I think it does become easier. One thing that I think is important is, how do you describe the sex acts? What are the words you use to describe your body, your anatomy? And many couples have never talked about what kind of language feels comfortable to them. Is it strictly scientific terms, or is it romantic terms, or slang terms, or personalized terms? I mean, people name their body parts. And I said something to my husband the other day about his body part. And I said, do you like me to use this name or that name? And he says, oh, that other name doesn't even feel personal. I like you to use the name that I have. I'm like, okay, got that.
Yeah.
So great, right? Because people personalize it. And so we want to use the language that really works for our partner. Sometimes there's discrepancy. Maybe one person prefers slang and the other person feels uptight about that. And so like, no, I really like romantic language, or I'm really only comfortable using scientific terms. That's it. So, we have to find our way through to each other to get comfortable.
Got it. One of the things I love about what you talk about often, and I think this is what your book alludes to also, is when we get married at first, there's lots of desire. It's like abundant in the relationship. And over time, it, just with the way life happens, it's easy for that desire to kind of fade away or kind of dissolve a little bit. Why is that?
I think that desire and having desire leaves us in a state of vulnerability because we're wanting. And because the body is also this primitive crossroads of our childhood needs and our romantic attachments, this crossroads place becomes very fraught with tension. And so, many times we actually downplay our desire. There's an author, one of my favorite authors, Stephen Mitchell, he wrote Can Love Last? And he says, desire doesn't fade, we kill it. And that's because, our partner could stop loving us, could love another, or could ultimately die. And I often have thought about, even the best love story, the most true, the most heartfelt, the truest, the most loyal, the deepest love story ends badly. Every
Yeah.
love story
Yep.
ends.
Uh-huh.
Because our partner eventually dies. And so there's always tragedy at the end of love.
So we kind of protect ourselves. And by protecting ourselves, we don't allow ourselves to really give fully in our desires.
That's right. We don't allow ourselves to desire. And of course, we diminish the experience that we could have in love and in sex because we're always protecting ourselves. And, we're afraid. We're afraid that our partner could call us a freak, or maybe will shame us for what we desire, or we're afraid our partner won't, think what we desire is very sexy at all. It's just too vanilla. I have one person and they just kind of like the old baseball, first base, second base, third base, home, and that works for them every single time. And that's how they like it. And that's what they want. And their partner is a little interested in experimentation, so talking about what it feels like is the difficulty. I think that talking about our sex life, maybe our sexual experience, our childhood, what we learned growing up, what we did growing up, many children begin their sexual life with masturbation. All of those facts are important, but really what is deeper than just the facts of the number of people you slept with, or who you were with, or what you did, is how you felt about what was happening. Maybe it's what you wished had happened. I had a couple the other day that I was working with in treatment, and they had done the assignment that I had given them. It was just a sensate focused assignment, which is simply to touch each other without genital stimulation and learn to enjoy touch. And as they talked about it, I tried to deepen their experience of talking about it. So I made her kind of talk further and more specifically. Well, first she starts out, well, we touched each other. It was good. We felt romantic. We felt close and warm. Okay, great. Where did you touch him? And then she was like, well, I touched him everywhere. I says, where specifically did you really like touching him? Because this was non-genital. This was a non-genital assignment. And eventually she said, well, I like touching his legs. And I said, what about his legs? And eventually she says, I like the strength of his upper leg, and I like the softness of his inner leg. And I said, tell me more about that. And then I said, could you tell me a fantasy about what would make this touching better? And she was laughing, and laughter is a way that we all kind of escape the intimate moment.
Yeah.
As I focused her on it, she was able
You're making her stretch, aren't you? You're really making her really stretch.
Exactly. And so eventually, she drops into a fantasy and talks about how she wanted to use warm oil and how she imagined, the experience going. And as she talked about it, I said, what are you feeling right now in your body? And she said, I'm feeling this pit in my stomach of vulnerability. It feels good. And I'm feeling aroused. And he was like, wow, I didn't know my legs were so powerful. And then I had him reverse and talk about his fantasy of it. And he too got aroused. And in less than 10 minutes, these people who struggled with desire and struggled with arousal had used words that were really just between the two of them. It wasn't even hot, spicy fantasies. It was about their desire to give pleasure and to receive pleasure. And they saw themselves open up to each other. And it's so beautiful. This is what creates desire, is this vulnerability, talking about sex. It is so powerful. We may think that, spicing it up and doing different things is how we create desire. And I'm not against that. I think that's wonderful and playful and something that I want to encourage. But I think it's this opening our hearts to each other and staying vulnerable that is the real secret to lifelong desire.
That's great. So how can couples try this at home? If you're listening to this today, how would you start that conversation with your spouse and say, I want to explore some desire together?
I mean, I think I would just do what I had this couple do. Could you describe touching your partner, where you would like to touch them, what you imagine seeing as you touch them, how you imagine in the best way your partner responding to your touch, and just say it out loud. It's such a sexy exercise to do that.
Is there a part of us that we like to, like you mentioned, laugh or kind of shut down or suppress when we feel vulnerable? Any tips or exercises we can go through to kind of really push through that and work through that? Because if you want to have that desire, you need to get through whatever it is that's holding you back.
Exactly. Well, I think you've kind of said it. How do we push through that nervousness and that anxiety about saying things out loud? We all have our escape hatches, right?
Yeah.
Some people just shut down. Oh, I don't want to talk about that right now. I don't like talking about that. I just want to do it. I had a friend, we had some couples that were very close, and we got together and met in intentional sharing for a number of years. And at one point we talked about sex, and this guy said, talking about sex. No, you're just supposed to do it. But I
That's
think
an escape, isn't it?
It is an escape.
Right.
Because the exercise is really about opening and sharing our erotic minds. The body changes, and the body, becomes less attractive over time. And if you're just reliant upon a visual attraction forever, then, I think it's easy to not feel as aroused. But our erotic minds, our erotic minds mature and get better and get sexier. And we can open those up to each other and share what's going on inside, which is, makes us vulnerable. And I think it's so exciting as a partner to hear about it. I've been married for many, many years at this point. And my husband and I were pretty naive when we began. And, it's better now. It's a lot better now because we're braver and we're more courageous. And we tell each other what we think about. We tell each other what we fantasize about. And so sex is much richer at this age and stage, and technically much better. We had an anniversary weekend, and we made love. And my husband said afterwards, Laurie, you're amazing now. But the comfort that you have in your body and the way you give yourself over to this experience, he's like, it's so much better than the many, 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 many years ago that we began.
That's awesome. I did an exercise once where I set the timer for 10 minutes and I put pen to paper and just wrote out what my sexuality wants. I just kept writing. And this was mostly for me. I just letting like that part of me speak. And a lot of it included fantasies that I have and things that I'm interested in and everything. And the timer went off 10 minutes later. I look at the paper, I'm like, holy cow, I didn't know I could write so much in such a short amount of time. But was the scariest part was sharing it with my wife, like, because it is scary, but it's like it seems extremely personal, but it's also one of the best experiences I've had too. And I think in sharing that, one thing I learned too is I didn't share it with like the spirit of like, okay, and then we have to do these things, or okay, there wasn't like an agenda or some sort of like, I'm trying to trick her into trying something new that she may not want to do. That there was none of that. It was more like, this is just me. This is just an open sharing.
I love that you did that, Dan. I think that is so smart. I mean, because you were really using that exercise to know yourself better. And then you offered it without an agenda to your wife. This is just who I am. This is just what I think about. And that's a really open, non-pressuring way to share. And I think that increases engagement, right? We have an opportunity in this vulnerable place to increase engagement with our partner, even if our partner never wants to do that, do the things that we fantasize about, knowing us and hearing our vulnerable sharing is a way that deepens the marriage. So I think that's an incredible exercise. I think all of you listening, do what Dan just did. I like that one too.
Great. Yep. Whew. All right. As the host of the Foreplay Radio, we got to talk about foreplay today
Okay.
a little bit. So I think I wonder if most couples get foreplay wrong, or they misunderstand what foreplay is and what it's intended to. Can you talk on that?
Sure. You know, foreplay, I think the difficulty with the name of it is that it means something that happens before the real act, right?
Right.
And many heterosexual couples believe that the real act is sexual intercourse. Most women don't climax with sexual intercourse. There's only about 15% of all women who can climax with what I call a hands-off, have a hands-off orgasm, penis in vagina, sexual intercourse. Most women climax with clitoral stimulation, and they need a lot of it.
Yeah.
And they don't like it until they feel aroused.
Yes.
So women need at least about 15 to 20 minutes of consecutive, contiguous clitoral stimulation to reach orgasm. And many times their male partners say, okay, you know, I know she needs this, let's get down to business. But she's not ready to receive that kind of touch. It feels invasive, it feels dry, it can be painful in an unaroused state. It might feel sandy. And so, you know, what's a person to do? And some of that is, I think, setting the mood. And I call it the 2020 solution, that many women need about 20 minutes of dropping into the sexual moment where she is transitioning from the list of all the things she's got to do, you know, and letting that go and becoming physical, entering a sensual place. And some of that is just accomplished with holding and cuddling and stroking places, not the genitals, not the breasts, you know, because men have a body that is like a hot car tanked up with gas. You know,
Yep.
they are ready to go because of their levels of testosterone. Women have about, at best, we call it, it's a unit, 70 nanograms per deciliter of testosterone in their blood. And that's the hormone that causes physiological desire and also helps with arousal. Men have about,
go ahead.
men,
You're about
yeah,
to say what men have?
men have about 700 nanograms per deciliter in their blood when they're about 20 or 30.
Okay.
You know, maybe up to 1,000.
So 10 times more, or in excess
Yes.
of 10 times more.
When they're very young. By the time a woman is 40, she's at about 20. He could still be at about 500 to 600. So now we're talking 30 times as much. By the time she's menopausal, 0.2 is considered normal. 0.2 compared to a male who's still at 500-600.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
radical
we can't
difference.
rely on hormones alone to get desire, is what you're saying.
Nope. Desire for women does not lie in their bodies. It really lies in their mind, their imagination, and their fantasies. And women desperately need emotional connection to turn on. I mean, many women say, you know, I can't feel desire. I don't feel anything unless I feel emotionally connected to my partner. And the science kind of bears that out, that women, part of their sexual arousal cycle comes from emotional connection. And, you know, I challenge women on this. I say, you know, I understand you need that. And I really celebrate that and I support that. I am a female. I get that. I get that in my body. One thing I might challenge with is, do you need it absolutely every single time? Because if you know that your partner needs sexual connection in order to feel emotional safety, which is the opposite direction of that cycle, you know, perhaps every once in a while you can offer sexuality as a pathway for him to feel more emotional, to be more open and safe emotionally, so that you both get your needs met. I don't think, even though I think women do need this and men need to pay attention to that, that time together, whatever your, wife's or partner's love language is really helpful in creating safety for her as part of foreplay, essentially, that this is something that is necessary for her to get there.
Got it. So what's the next step then?
So the next step is technique. And I think that, many times men really don't know where to touch. Many men don't actually know where to find the clitoris.
Yeah.
They think that all of the labia, all of the vulva, which is the outer lips back down to the vagina, are innervated, that they have the same sort of nerve endings as every other part of the vulva. So they don't know that there's actually parts of the vulva that feel better than other parts. And obviously the clitoris is the main part. It's kind of more analogous to the penis. I think men are brought up to think that the penis and vagina is kind of like hand in glove. What he's feeling on the outside, she's feeling on the inside.
Right.
Totally not true at all, not even close.
That's what I used to think too. So many men are taught that way or think that way.
Yeah, of course. That's what erotic movies show. That's what porn shows. That's what men grow up thinking. And it makes sense. I think it totally makes sense. If sexual intercourse is the big deal, right? Makes sense. But actually, the clitoris is more analogous to the penis, and the vagina is a little more analogous to the testicles and the skin on the scrotum. So it's totally different. So her clitoris too has different parts. And I'll tell you a little metaphor to think about it. If you think about the clitoris as Little Red Riding Hood, and she kind of starts out in a puddle. And as she gets aroused, she stands up a little straighter. Women's clitoris actually gets erect, just like a male's penis gets erect. Not quite as firm, not quite as visible, but definitely feelable. You can sense that with your fingers. And as she stands up, she's a little bit stooped over. Her hood is drawn, and her face is looking at her vagina. And her face is the glands of her clitoris. And that is the very most sensitive part of her clitoris. And there's a seam on the back of her cloak. It's called the shaft. That's another very sensitive part. Her labia is kind of the cloak of the clitoris. And it is, the darker the woman, the darker the cloak. So a Black woman actually has darker labia. And a woman who is post childbirth has darker labia as well. And then there is like feet. So if you imagine her standing up, then the feet is kind of the root of the clitoris, and that's another deeper place that can be stimulated. And her cloak comes down and can be stimulated from the underside as well as the feet of her clitoris by touching her G-spot inside her vagina. So the G-spot is about an inch or two and a half inches into her vagina on the anterior side, or basically the top side if she's lying on her back. And those are really sensitive places in her clitoris. And again, most women don't like that touched until she's already somewhat aroused. But knowing these really special spots, you can focus with manual stimulation, with oral sex, on all the really sensitive parts of the clitoris.
That's great. So it's important, I guess, if you're a husband listening to this and want to get better at this stage of foreplay, you got to start at a lower level and build up to a higher level of arousal. You just don't go straight for the most sensitive parts.
That's right. That's
kind of
right.
work the outside in, kind of like how my mom taught us. If you're at a restaurant, fancy restaurant, lots of forks and knives, you always start with the outermost first fork, right? And you move as the meal progresses, you move in. I think it's like that.
Absolutely. I love that. That's such a great metaphor. Exactly.
Great. How do couples, how can they redefine sex so it's not just like what you said, penis and vagina, but it's a lot more than just that they can just enjoy all the touch and the entire experience as and consider that as sexually bonding?
Yeah, I think that for many women, since they don't have orgasms with sexual intercourse, they might want to have an orgasm beforehand or after, or he might want to have an orgasm with oral sex, or she might as well. I mean, there's many ways that orgasm kind of is the culmination, but it doesn't necessarily have to be penis and vagina. And I think that for many people, just really intimate touching is the main meal. I mean, sometimes I think women especially say, the experience of being penetrated, of having him inside me is so amazing, so intimate. I love that experience. I don't even need an orgasm. I mean, I think it's important that women have regular orgasms and, 85-90% of the time they're reaching climax. But there are times that it's her call that she may say, this is not my night for that, but I really want to be intimate with you. I really want to have sex with you. I would love to have you inside me. And that can be a beautiful experience too. I mean, cuddling naked releases oxytocin. It releases that bonding hormone. So that's another great thing. Many people wouldn't call that sexual, but I think it's very sensual. And it does accomplish the bonding that physical touch brings to us. So I think, get away from penis and vagina as the only expression. I mean, maybe it's, she's filled with desire and he's not. Many men experience a lot of stress and they're not ever horny. They have all kinds of reasons that they don't feel sexual maybe that night. So maybe she uses a vibrator and he holds her. Or maybe it's he's having trouble climaxing inside her. And so after they've had intercourse for a while, maybe after she's had a climax, she holds him and he touches himself. I mean, there can be all kinds of variety of touch that if couples are flexible, they can have pleasure. And I say flexibility is sex insurance.
I love that. That's great. And that's a lot of the goal of the Intimately Us app. We have lots of ideas on how to make it, just add a lot of variety to the lovemaking routine, so to speak. You have different scripts, so to speak. And also, like what you talked about with understanding anatomy and everything, we cover a lot of those things inside the app. So
yay!
It's all free. So you can, it's a good lesson, I think, I hope.
That is such a great resource for people to use the app and Intimately Us, as a conversation starter, right? We talked about what can couples do, and this could be a really fun, sexy date night to use the app to start talking about things that they normally might feel a little shy about.
Love it. Yep. All right, Laurie, before we wrap this up, I want to know what you would consider are some of your black belt sex tips. This is like you're talking to a couple, they're getting along great, there's a lot of flirting, they're connecting emotionally really well, and now they're ready to take their relationship to the next level. What would you?
So this is a couple that is already sexual, but I got to give them black belt tips, huh?
Yes. They've been plateauing for a while. Now they're ready for the next step.
Okay, so black belt tips, 2 things. Get away to a hotel room.
I love it.
Go and meet each other in the bar. Maybe she goes early, especially if she's a young mother. She goes early at 3:00 in the afternoon, takes a long nap, takes a long bath, primps and gets all dressed up and meets him downstairs in the bar. They have apps, a few drinks so that they're tipsy and not drunk. And then they go upstairs and have hot sex away from their familiar space, right? Away from the children. And then maybe she stays there all night long and sleeps, and he goes back and relieves the babysitter.
I love it.
Yeah, I think that is, every woman I've ever talked to says, I would want to have hot sex that night. Knowing that she has a time to herself, rest, time to, get pretty. And then she's going to have time afterwards to herself to sleep and rest and have some time until noon the next day that is just hers. I think women really need more autonomy, especially when they're raising a family. I think the other black belt tip is to play a game called Don't Come.
Okay.
Is for both men and women.
Sounds like torture.
It is a little bit of sexual torture, exactly so. So they want to arouse their partner kind of to the brink of orgasm and make their partners stop and kind of stay in this really high arousal state, and then bring them back up again to that high arousal state and make them stop. And maybe the third time they let them go over the edge to orgasm. It is a fantastic way to build the platform of arousal that makes for a more powerful orgasm for both men and women. So it's kind of a psychological torture, but it's also a way when you're having trouble focusing and you're looking at your body from kind of hovering over the bed and you're thinking, wow, it's not my night. I'm not even getting aroused. If you play Don't Come, totally changes the game. It changes your psychological mindset about what is supposed to be happening. Rather than thinking, I'm not getting aroused, you're thinking, I'm not supposed to get aroused. And guess what happens?
That little defiant part inside of us, like, oh yeah?
Yep, it gets aroused. And I can tell you how it works and it'll still work.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. If people want to connect with you, find out more about what you do, how can they find you?
Sure. I would love for them to find me on Foreplay Radio, sextherapy.com. I'm also on iTunes, Spotify, anywhere you find podcasts, you can find Foreplay Radio, Sex and Couples Therapy. So
very good.
Come listen to George and myself.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. This has been wonderful.
Yep.
You have great ideas too.
Thanks.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode of Get Your Marriage On. And if you did, we would love it if you would take a few seconds to give us a rating on iTunes and to share the show with your friends. They'll thank you for life. Once you've done that, you can head over to getyourmarriageon.com for more resources about today's topic and to download our amazing marriage apps. Now go get your marriage on.